Welcome back. We are in 2 Nephi chapter 5. This is a doozy, so we'll see where we get today. Behold, it came to pass that I, Nephi, did cry much unto the Lord my God because of the anger of my brethren. It's just funny following the last chapter, and we're talking about he apparently has an issue with anger that's coming through the text. And the first thing we read in the next verse or the next chapter is that, man, he just can't complain enough to God about his brother's anger issues. So that verse gives me a chuckle. But behold, their anger did increase against me, insomuch that they did seek to take away my life. Okay, so there's a couple things here. Of course they were angry. At that time, blessed was the firstborn that opened the womb, and if he was a son, wow, and at the time, sons were, tradition usually was that they got double portion of the inheritance, that the leadership of the family fell upon them when the father was no longer in the picture. And so this is not something that Laman and Lemuel are making up because they're stiff-necked. This is just the way it was. And so when you're challenging ancient traditions here, you're going to ruffle some feathers and you're going to anger people. And this is what Nephi's doing without any apology or explanation. So I know this is hard because this is not usually the way things are. But since you're not really interested in the things of God and having that direct your life, that has fallen upon me, and I'm doing my best to direct us. And I want us to fare well. And so this is what it makes leadership so hard sometimes, is because if you feel like you have that better connection with God and that you're in some ways superior to those you want to lead, why then it leads to all sorts of problems in a man and a woman generally, that give a man a little bit of power and they immediately begin to abuse it, Joseph Smith said. It just takes a little bit of something to set you apart, and all of a sudden your ego starts inflating every which way. And so the thing is there were several things going on in this family. There was a dysfunctional family unit. There was a narcissistic family structure. They were not following traditions because the golden child is going to inherit everything. And, and in some ways, this does resemble the story of Jacob and his sons. Takes away also later on, he revokes the firstborn blessing from Reuben and puts it on Joseph. So again, we see this golden child type of thing. But the point is that this kind of is echoed in this story, that the firstborn isn't going to the rights, or the heir of, who's the rightful heir, it's not going to go to that person because of sin, what the father considers sin. So he revokes that. And so we do see this certain parallel with this story of Joseph of Egypt. So insomuch that they did seek to take away my life. And the thing is that he keeps saying this, and yet he still lives, and yet here he is, just, I just can't. Let's go to 3 and we'll talk more about this. Yea, they did murmur against me. I know that this word has been and turned into something. Mormons have redefined this word because of Laman and Lemuel. But according to the dictionary and the rest of English speakers, it means to say something in a low, soft, or indistinct voice. And you just got to ask yourself, do people generally threaten murder in a murmur? Do they threaten violence in a murmur? I mean, when they're so worked up and angry, is this a murmur? 911 call. What's going on? My husband, he's murmuring at me. He's standing there. I know he wants to kill me because he's murmuring against me. So, you know what I mean? It's just, the 911 operator like, what? And so when you look at the word murmur, it just doesn't have, they raged against me, or they, whatever, something, but they murmured against me. That's all you got? Did they wish him dead? Oh, yeah. I'm sure they wished tyrant number 2 an extension of Lehi number 2, who just is like, mini me of Lehi. Yeah, they probably wished him dead because they frustrated him on so many levels. But again, I can't help but point out, Nephi keeps saying, they're going to kill me, and yet he lives. Just something to ponder. And also to ponder, do people threaten murder in a murmur? Maybe if they're in a place where they can't speak, according to the passion of their heart, like your mom at church, sit still, or, maybe, But generally, when it's just you and your family, what's the need to murmur? Who else is, there's no, too many skeletons in that family, in the closet in that family, because everybody sees what's going on with everybody else, and everybody's been there for every family blowout. Everybody knows what's going on. So that's where I'm like, why would they need to murmur? Really? They could just say it out loud. So again, I need to reflect. I have a deep distrust of Nephi. And I'll tell you why. Because even he himself contradicts himself in this chapter later on, in chapter 26 of 2nd Nephi. He's going to contradict the very things he says in this chapter. So to me, he has caused so many problems. And I misspoke in the last video. I said it was Lehi that said something. Well, he does as well. But the main thing is in this chapter about race, because it is about race as it is translated. But then, this chapter gets so complicated because, and I'm jumping the gun, okay? I just, because I want to get to that part. I just want to, okay. They murmur against me. Okay. Our younger brother thinks to rule over us, and we have had much trial because of him. And have they not had much trial because of him? Yes, he's also had trials because of them, but so have they. And to totally disregard the story of Laman and Lemuel and their perspective really honestly develops a certain judgmental and unkind and uncompassionate attitude. And if you're identifying with Lehi and Nephi and feeling that this is justified, the way that they treat Laman and Lemuel, and the way they continually criticize and belittle them because they don't have the faith of Nephi and Lehi, and because they're not going to easily agree with their younger brother as maybe other people in the camp would. And so there is a certain level of tension. That dynamic creates tension. Lulaine, come here. And we have much trial because of him. Wherefore now let us slay him. Okay, so that's what they're saying now. He hears them. I imagine this isn't, he still describes it as a murmur. They murmur against me saying. So they're saying this in a murmur, so it's not like, no, let us slay him. It's like, okay, no, let us slay him, I mean, I guess tone of voice doesn't always reflect passion, but wherefore, now let us slay him that we may not be afflicted more because of his words. And you hear that. She's just trying to get outside to do something very naughty. She's all pottied and taken care of. That is the little noises of irritation. Let me out. I need it. That isn't the potty one. Wherefore now let us slay him, that we may not be afflicted because of his words. For behold, we will not have him to be our ruler. For it belongs unto us, who are the elder brethren, to rule over this people. Traditionally, 100%, they're correct. Now, I do not write upon these plates all the words which they murmured against me. So you got to think, Mormons have kind of reinvented this word to be some kind of, I don't know, more of a display of anger. But, like I said, according to the rest of the English-speaking world, a murmur is kind of like, okay, if you say so, It's not usually associated with imminent assault. When you're kind of, talking like this, that doesn't indicate an increase in oxygen or anything like that. So this is what I'm saying. This is why it's so worthwhile to take one word, especially one that is repeated. The moment you see a word repeated, really pause and ponder that word. Pay attention to this word. Because this word is like a secret message. And what is it trying to tell you? It's trying to tell you that Laman and Lemuel were like, kind of like this. Let's slay them. They were like talking like in a low, This is what I'm saying. Was it what they're saying pleasant? No, but what I'm saying is, where's the adrenaline in murmuring? Where's this big threat is what I'm trying to say. And it came to pass that the Lord did warn me. Okay, I'll finish this and then I'll get to my piece. That I, Nephi, should depart from them and flee into the wilderness, and all those who would go with me. Okay, so this verse, wow. This verse says a lot. First of all, it says he's established himself as a king. I'm going to collect followers. He's also trying to tell us that the same God that later in the Book of Mormon sends missionaries to, generations later, as the Lamanites and the Nephites have divided, the Lamanites have become a warmongering, bitter, angry people who just want revenge for the injustices that they felt their people have endured by the hands of the Nephites, who they feel have stolen their birthright and who have insulted them and cursed them and have taken the word of God from them, what they did have. Even though they later on don't believe, because how can they? They no longer have the word. That is the cursing. And Nephi cursed them. He literally was the source of the curse when he took the scriptures with them. They didn't have a chance. So the thing that is confusing for me is that we're supposed to believe from Nephi that the same God that sends missionaries to the Lamanites, who have become an angry, warmongering people who would kill a Nephite on sight, that God would send missionaries there to them to try to save them and rescue them. But God wouldn't send Nephi to go rescue his own brothers. To quit fighting over whose people is who, and to just fall on his knees before his brothers to say, I love you. No matter what you believe, no matter if you don't believe at all, I love you. And that's what the sons of Mosiah as missionaries did. That's exactly what they did. They had so much faith and trust in God and in the power of love. And and that adventure they had must have been so apparent on some level, that vibe they carried, that intention, that energy that they had. that must have in some ways been palpable. And that's why miracles followed. And so I'm supposed to believe Nephi, who says, oh boy, here we go again. Get over here. Get on the couch, you little complainant. You little complainant. I'm supposed to believe the same God who sends the missionaries under such horrific and dangerous circumstances, and who later suffers so many things and so many dangers and close calls. I'm supposed to believe that same God told Nephi to leave his brothers, who murmured horrible things. They said horrible things against him. I don't trust him or his father. I don't trust them. And because I don't, I feel it is such a blessing from the Spirit, because when I read this chapter, I'm thinking, oh, this is proof positive that this man is a spiritual degenerate. And so it all falls in line for me. But for the rest of the membership of the church, what Nephi says is of God, everything. You know, instead of being a cautionary tale. Like, hey, I have news for you, unbelievers. It isn't looking good for you when you don't have the gospel, and when you're cursed in that way, you're going to struggle. But guess what? You believers, even though you have the truth, you have problems too. And I'm going to show them to you. And I'm going to show you what happens when problems like yours lead to war. And that's not how the members read this book. They read it, Nephi, Lehi, good. Sam, background, good. Laman, Lemuel, evil. They read it, honestly, as a kindergartner would. As a little storybook for children, you know, that you tell them at night. Bad guy versus the good guy. Instead of seeing it as so much more multi-dimensional. Where, you know, the good guys have issues too. Just like in the Bible, you know, Moses had his issues with, you know, why he was a fugitive, killing the Egyptian. David had issues. But Noah, you know, he curses the sun like this and calls him a servant of servant. And this scripture from this fool in this instance, you know, knock on wood, excuse me, but this person has created that little sentence in Genesis chapter 9 that talks about servant of servants. You know, this is going to be, oh, and may he be the servant of you, and may he be the servant of you, and just, ooh, that has become, that was the excuse for slavery. So imagine the torment, the misery, the injustice, the death that has been caused from that verse. Because people wanted to use it as an excuse to endorse the evil of slavery. And the thing is, later on in Alma, when the Lamanites are converted to the gospel because of these incredible missionaries, and they need to escape from the Lamanites who didn't convert, because of course there's tension. It's like, oh, you're believing the God of the enemy, you know. So now there's great tension between the Lamanites and the non-believing and the believing Lamanites. So they need to escape, and the Lamanites offer, we'll be your slaves to make up for all the many murders, you know. And Ammon says, this is against the law that my father established, his father being Mosiah, that there are to be no slaves. That's against the law to have slaves. So again, you know, you just, in some ways, it sounds like Nephi is trying to take, again, that thing from Noah, who cursed Canaan as a servant, and he makes it a race thing. For sure. Like, you know, scholars still debate, what does a servant of servant mean? You know, there isn't, you know, there's everything else that tries to attribute it to more melanin in your skin, that comes from philosophers and other people. This doesn't come from the Bible itself. But does it speak against slavery? No. Are there guidelines for slavery? Yes. So the Bible doesn't really speak against slavery, but the Book of Mormon does. And that's the thing. You know, if Nephi had not done what he did here, just as like Noah had not done what he did there, so much misery could have been avoided. But to me, the more I study it, I see Nephi is so narcissistic. And I see him as not a trustworthy servant of God. Just as I see Jonah is not a very trustworthy. I wouldn't ask him to watch my dog, you know, or I don't know. He just seems so uncompassionate, you know. There are prophets that are lacking. And Nephi is a lacking prophet that helped contribute to the war. And not only helped contribute to the war, but because people are reading it as though he were this, you know, flawless person, they're running with this information in this chapter. And it has caused misery and heartbreak. And how many people of more melanin we would have in the gospel if it were not for this. If it were not for this. So, you know, the curse again comes from Nephi. When he walked away with the scriptures and took everything, took the Liahona, took everything, which was really by birthright, still theirs. I mean, even though emotionally everything, Lehi had treated Nephi as a firstborn. It doesn't say there was any ceremony or whatever that was like, you know, I now pronounce you my firstborn. And in his dying words, he still refers to Laman as his firstborn in his dying words. So Laman had every right, even though his dad didn't have anything much positive besides that to say, it was still assumed probably it was his right. So the fights must have been terrific. And we know that before he died and, you know, Lehi drove into them more and, you know, shared things that couldn't even be included on these plates. But we're supposed to believe that the same God that sent Ammon and the sons of Messiah to the Lamanites in real danger of their lives. This would be no murmuring. This would be arrow, you know, way beyond a murmuring stage. You know, we're supposed to believe that the God would send missionaries there to them, but he wouldn't send Nephi to his own brothers. You can't give up. This story is telling you right here, you can't give up. You can't give up. Because generations depend on it. Generations depend on you not giving up. This is your flesh and blood. You can't give up. Generations depend on it. And so that's why it is my testimony that the beginning of the Book of Mormon and the books of Nephi, that it is a cautionary tale because of the outcome, because of where it goes to and what it leads to, and how it totally overwrites how people should be later on in the book. And so for me personally, when I read what he says down here, you're right. And it came to pass that the Lord did warn me that I, Nephi, should depart from them and flee into the wilderness, and all those who would go with me. And this is interesting because there's someone really important missing. Wherefore it came to pass that I, Nephi, did take my family, and also Zoram and his family. I'm sorry. This part just gets me. And Sam and my elder brother, and his family, and Jacob and Joseph, my younger brethren, and also my sisters, and all those who would go with me. And all those who would go with me were those who believed in the warnings and the revelations of God, wherefore they did hearken unto my words. Did you ever notice who's not there? Sariah. With all my heart, I believe she stayed. Laman and Lemuel. She would have been the first person he mentioned. And that has so blessed my life in so many ways, to know in my heart that she stayed with them. That she knew that her husband and son had cursed them. And she chose to stay with her cursed children. For me, even though it's implied in the text, for me, that there's been such a powerful witness and a powerful testimony of Sariah's character. We already know how worried she was when she thought they perished. How could she ever leave them? How could she ever leave them, knowing the circumstances they were being left in, without scriptures, without anything? And here she was like the original sons of sorry. Literally, every time I start to get weepy, the Lord is like, cut. Give you a minute. I know it is annoying. I remember when my mom would get weepy, just like, and then it would make me cry. It was so annoying sometimes. But Sariah was like the original sons of Mosiah in my heart. And I how could she walk away from the children that needed her most? But this verse says many things about Nephi, that he gathers people, that like I was saying, people, they didn't have a choice. He had the goods. And I just don't like the way he says at the end, and all those who believed in the warnings and the revelations of God. And he kind of tries to group his mother into in there as those who didn't, she stayed. But the fact that he didn't, she's too important a character to leave out. The rejoicing they had when they came back and they didn't perish after visiting Laban. She's too much of a character, and she's obviously loves them deeply. Only she behaves as a mother would, she's murmuring against the prophet of God and also her husband, and complaining against him. That is not someone that is not loving and caring and terrified for her children, all of them. But Nephi, in taking these things, literally dooms his brothers. And we did take our tents and whatsoever things were possible for us, and did journey in the wilderness for the space of many days. And after we had journeyed for the space of many days, we did pitch our tents. And you wonder how many days are many days, because how hard would it be to follow a camp of that size, traipsing with all their stuff and everything. How hard, where there are no roads, how easy would it be to find where these people went? No matter how many days, if they really wanted to know. And later on, it can't have been that far because Nephi claims to know what's going on with them and what they're up to. So was he spying on them? It can't have been that far if he needed to go just far enough so that he thought they were too lazy to walk or something. But far enough so that he knew he'd be willing to walk just to see what's going on. I don't know, but it's a very interesting dynamic in here. And after we had journeyed for the space of many days, we did pitch our tents. And my people would that we should call the name of the place Nephi. Wherefore, we did call it Nephi. Oh, how humble of him. Let's don't name it something like God rescued us or safe in the Lord or something. No, let's call it Nephi. And all those who were with me did take upon them to call themselves the people of Nephi. Okay. Yeah, go ahead and call yourselves the people of me. Sounds good. I mean, does anybody else see a problem with this? I mean, I'm sorry, but I always see this from a sister's point of view. Like, my brother, okay, go ahead and call yourself Bobites, It's like, what are you smoking? I ain't calling myself no Bobite. I don't know, but there seems to be a certain level of dominion over in this picture that is being painted for me. And we did observe to keep the judgments and the statutes and the commandments of the Lord in all things according to the law of Moses. And the Lord was with us, and we did prosper exceedingly, for we did sow seed, and we did reap again in abundance. And we began to raise flocks and herds and animals of every kind, very industrious. And I, Nephi, had also brought the records, which were engraven upon the plates of brass. It's just the opposite. We're encouraged, share the Book of Mormon, give the Book of Mormon to someone. And it's just the opposite, what he's doing right here. Just because somebody's not interested now doesn't mean that one day they won't be. They will be one day maybe, but they got to have it. I mean, now it's so easy, internet, in those days, that was it. He left with it. I mean, there was a lot of oral tradition, but I promise you, I don't think Laman and Lemuel were much into that. I'm sure there was a huge resentment of all things having to do with God because of their high and mighty, totally lack of empathetic attitude. I'm sure they didn't, if this book is what made you this way toward us, no thank you. So it's like, you can drive people away from God by your behavior. This to me is so apparent in this book that arrogance and a certain, a lack of thorn in the flesh, apparently, to keep that person humble. It can lead to disastrous ends, can lead to generations of war. If you can't take care of your family problems now, you'll have to watch the echo of it from heaven. And wow, what an echo Lehi and Nephi have left behind, that they still have to watch to this day. He brought the records which are upon the plates of brass, and also the ball or compass which was prepared for my father by the hand of the Lord, according to that which is written. I'm sorry. I wish you could imagine what I see. I see someone going into someone's house and seeing the only unread copy of Book of Mormon and taking it with them. And then planning on never talking to them again. No matter what kind of sinner they are. I can't imagine doing that to anybody. To dooming them to live without the words of God. You know, no matter what anybody's choice is in this world, whether they, find any value in any type of scripture, is their choice, of course. But for those of us who really delight in diving in there and finding all this stuff and pondering them, I can't imagine being able to do that to another person. I can't imagine taking the scriptures away from my own flesh and blood, let alone any human being. But again, it just tells me that righteous people can be awfully wicked in their own way. And it hasn't changed. And it began to pass that we began to prosper exceedingly and to multiply in the land. And the thing is, I'm sorry, this is just kind of a funny part. They're doing so wonderfully, okay? And where are these brothers that wanted to murder him so badly? That wouldn't be so outraged that he took all the family treasures. Where are they? They would have been so easy to track. You didn't have to send an army probably. You could have sent a few little arrow snipers, whatever. But, it's just, I'm like, where is this great predicted murder that we were guaranteed so badly that he had to leave? And I'm sorry, but I just don't believe Nephi. And I, Nephi, did take the sword of Laban, and after the manner of it did make many swords, lest by any means the people who are now called Lamanites should come upon us and destroy us. For I knew their hatred toward me and my children, and those who were called, wait for it, my people. His language always betrays him. You know what? He did make himself their king. They called themselves by their name. He engaged them in labor. He directed them. He was their teacher. It's just, they were his people. Later on, he denies it. As first he describes it, and then he denies it. So it just, for me, it's hilarious. Oh my, it's like, how can people pass this stuff by and not be laughing is what I want to know. And the thing is, we knew, he said that Laban's sword was made of steel. I don't know, maybe it was a type of steel. Maybe they could get iron and then they quenched it or whatever it's called, in something, oil, and they called it steel, But, after the manner of Laban, okay. And the fact that he knew the hatred towards me and my children, and this is the hatred that he helped to stoke, and so I'm like, the way he tries to totally extract himself from any responsibility, as though he could so easily say it's all their fault. That is so antithetical to empathy and compassion. I remember one time, gosh, this is a weepy day. I had a pinched nerve in my back when I was a teenager. Oh, it was so painful. I couldn't walk. And I just sat in my bed crying. And I remember my little sister coming to me crying and saying she wished it would be her back. Of course, it made me cry. So I know what love looks like. I have seen what love looks like. And I do not see it in Nephi. So I don't believe anything he says. Some of the things, especially when he talks about the dream of his father, yes. But for the most part, I take everything he says with a grain of salt, unless I hear that ding, ding, ding from the Spirit. He's right there. He may be an egotistical, entitled, person, but he does have faith, Hopefully the compassion will develop later. We're working on it. So it's just, he just claims to know so much about his brothers and just sees nothing. There's like no self-reflection. That whole lament, oh, wretched son that I am, is so, where's the details, brother? Come on. It's like, spill it. If you were really humble, we get the DL on everything. But it's all veiled in this poetic language. And he manages to slip a curse in of his brothers while he was at it. Oh my, this guy. And I did teach my people and he taught them too, he was their teacher too, to build buildings and to work in all manner of wood and of iron, of copper and of brass and of steel. Again, there we are with the steel. As I was doing some research on steel, I can't remember who said this, and forgive me, individual. I'll try to rephrase it, but he said something to the effect that people in the ancients, there was types of steeling going on, but it was apparently just mixing ore or iron with charcoal at a certain heat, and then pouring either oil or water over it at a certain point, and that steeled it, that made it less soft than iron tended to be. So, when he says steel, is it that shiny stuff we know today? Probably not even close. Not even close. Oh, anyway, he said it was something like comparing ancient world steel to today's steel is like comparing a small child playing the piano and calling it music. To me, I like thinking of a dog, banging on the piano and calling it music. And all manner of iron, of copper, and of brass, and of steel, and of gold, and of silver, and of precious ores, which were in great abundance. And I, Nephi, did build the temple, and I did construct it after the manner of the temple of Solomon. I'm going to pause midway in that sentence because people say, oh, he built it just like the temple of Solomon. He built it after the manner. So we'll pause for the definition of the word manner. A way in which a thing is done or happens. That's it. If a certain room goes here and a certain room goes here, and where you wash up goes here, and where the sacrifices are done if there's a certain manner that things are done, this could be done in a tent. And it was done in a tent. And after that same manner that it was done in a tent, it was done in the Temple of Solomon. It was done in the same manner. It was set up in the same way. So it doesn't mean in the same manner, it just means that it had the same layout. And that it denoted the same thing. And that it took you through the same process. And it was designed to teach you the same thing. So it's a pattern. It's just a pattern. Are all patterns of pants the same? No, but it is a pattern. You got to have room for two legs if they're called pants. It's just a pattern. So I just had to pause on that word because so many people try to make the word manner into something it's not. And you just see how people manipulate language to their advantage. And it's just too bad, because people really, one of the things that has suffered so severely in our day is our language. People can't use the word between anymore. With you and I. Okay, English teacher will stop. It's with you and me, with me. Anything that you say with me, it's because it continues to be me, no matter how many other people are involved. It's still with me. And I just have to say that to you, because our language is really going down the drain. And the less you're able to communicate, the less you're able to know. So, we should be working on preserving the pure of our language. And that's why I do advocate for the King James, only because expand your knowledge of your own language. If it's uncomfortable for you, push through it. You'll get to know it. Do a little Google research. Educate yourself before, and you'll be a pro in 5 minutes. Maybe a little longer for some, but honestly, it's really no big deal. And I'm telling you, that language in some ways is so much more rich and intuitive and brilliantly put together than the language that we use today. So I think it's just so important to preserve the language. And this chapter really is the time to talk about that, because language is so important that if you take all the literature away from people, you are dooming people. I cannot emphasize enough what Nephi did, that he wouldn't leave them one thing, just some way to preserve their language. He was the one who murdered his brothers in the end. He did. He was the one that left them the way that he did. With nothing, to leave people like that, to me is a crime. And they're your own blood. Back to the temple. After the manner of the temple of Solomon, save it were not built of so many precious things, which is... For some reason, the highlight says it has to mean stones, but that's debatable. Maybe that's all that's left, because there was silver. Because he just described that there was so many precious ore, gold and silver. So you wonder what precious things. Maybe it is just stones. For they were not to be found upon the land. I'm sure that's an operation to find that kind of, I think you have to dig pretty deep to get to that kind of metamorphosis. They were not to be found upon the land, wherefore it could not be built like unto Solomon's temple. But the manner, again, we're with that, the pattern of the construction, remember, was like unto the temple of Solomon, and the workmanship thereof was exceedingly fine. So it came out great. And it came to pass, and that's all it is. We didn't have the gems, okay? But it came out great. And it came to pass that I, Nephi, did cause my people, not a king at all, I did cause my people to be industrious and to labor with their hands. And it came to pass that they would that I should be their king. I'm sorry. But he's pretty much their king. He's the only one who speaks for God. He determines what happens. He causes them to be industrious, and he considers them his people. So what about that? Is not being a king. This is why, for me, he's such a joke in many ways. And this makes total sense to me, because he had to have had some major flaws as a person and as a person of the gospel. And he must have had some major flaws that he could lead to this level of contention. And that's the story. And that's how the story starts, because of this level of contention. But I, Nephi, was desirous that they should have no king. It's like, or Pinocchio. Nevertheless, I did for them according to that which was in my power. I'm sorry. I mean, the guy talks like a king. He acts like a king. Maybe he doesn't dress like a king, but for all intents and purposes, he is a king. But we'll have to stop there, and we will pick up on verse 19 next time. And I just want to remind you that you are a child of God, and that God does delight to bless you with further light and knowledge, and only take in anything that just helps and heals. And that's what he wants. No matter how it's wrapped and how it comes to you, accept what helps and heals, and trust your spirit, trust your heart. And I just hope that you are worshiping in a place where you feel that intense connection and that beautiful taste of the delicious fruit of the tree of God's love. And I'll talk to you next time.